Welcome to Shop Talk with Brandi and James.
I'm Brandi.
And this is James. And we're here to talk about all things related to cross-cultural life and work.
We're going to draw from our experiences as we've lived different places around the world. And also occasionally we'll have some special guests. We can learn from their experiences as well.
Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about listening. Now, Brandi, you had this idea. Why did listening come up on your radar of things that we should talk about?
Well, a couple of reasons. Obviously, you and I are from the States, and it seems to be there's an atmosphere there right now of polarization where people are not listening to each other. People are tending to push each other further away instead of trying to move toward understanding. That's my perception of it. And it seems to be something that's not just happening in the States, but also it seems like something like that's happening in a lot of places in the world. Also, as we've mentioned before, the main reason cross-cultural workers leave the field is because of conflict with coworkers.
Interpersonal relationships, like that's one of the main reasons. And a lot of times it's with their colleagues and coworkers, not necessarily the people that they're living with.
Right. I think as cross-cultural workers, we tend to hold that so dearly and so closely, and our ideas of how it should be. Oftentimes our identity can get wrapped up in it as well, that we can tend to feel protective and defensive about how we see things, how we approach things. It can be harder to listen sometimes if you feel like you're protecting your ideas or your approach or just things like that.
Even calling. One of the challenges, I think, is for a lot of people that do go and live cross-culturally for whatever reason, whether it's a faith-based reason or you're working for an embassy, military, a lot of that type of person are really strong personalities and have strong belief systems, which is why they left a really comfortable place. I think when anything bumps up against that, we have this polarization, like you're either for me or you're against me. And I think it taps into some of our defense mechanisms. Like why do we listen? Why is it important?
Right. We listen to understand. So to understand the people we're with and to communicate also that we care about them, that what they're saying, where they are is valuable and worth listening to. When we don't listen, when our stance is to be protective of who we are, what we tend to do is communicate that they're not as important, or I'm right, you're wrong, and all I'm going to do is just protect where I am and protect myself.
Well, I think sometimes we also listen with half a brain because half of our brain's thinking about what we're going to say to reply.
Oh, yes, that is so true. Yes.
I have a quote about this.
Of course you do. James told me before we started recording he had a quote, but he wouldn't tell me what it was.
Sometimes you just got to be surprised.
Okay, what is it?
Dietrich Bonhoeffer says there is a kind of listening with half an ear that presumes already to know what the other person has to say. It is an impatient, inattentive listening that despises a brother and is only waiting for a chance to speak and thus get rid of the other person. This is no fulfillment of our obligation, and it is certain that here too our attitude towards our brother only reflects our relationship to God. It is little wonder that we are no longer capable of the greatest service of listening that God has committed us to, that of hearing a brother's confession, if we refuse to give ear to our brother on lesser subjects. But Christians have forgotten that ministry of listening has been committed to them by him who is himself the great listener, and whose work they should share. We should listen with the ears of God that we may speak the words of God.
Wow, that's so good.
It's also a little bit of a yikes.
Where's the yikes for you in that?
I just know that there's times that I do that, and both of us are trained counselors, and we spend a lot of time in our education and training practicing listening. But there's times even in counseling where I can see where somebody's going and I just want to help them get there because maybe they're stuck. This happens a lot with feelings where I don't think we have a great feeling vocabulary. So I'm trying to listen with empathy and help them because they may not have the full range of feeling words. However, what I'm doing in that moment is trying to do exactly what Bonhoeffer's saying, where I'm trying to jump up, presuming already to know the answer.
Oh, that's absolutely true. And I find myself doing that with counseling too. And I think it's probably something that newer counselors struggle with is that I'm already thinking about what I'm going to say because empty space is intimidating to me. And so I'm thinking about how I'm going to respond so I can keep the conversation going, so we can keep talking instead of listening to like, what are they saying right now? And even listening to the silence. What is the silence saying? And just making it the goal just to be present, listen, and understand.
One of my first clients I ever had was in graduate school. Other than the fact that I'm fairly large, I looked like I was 18. And this guy starts telling me his story. And the way that a lot of graduate schools work is their students are counselors. So it's really cheap counseling because everybody is aware that they're in training. So this one of my first clients ever had been through several students. Unfortunately, every semester he switched over. And for whatever reason, one of my first times meeting with him, he finally got to the place where he was comfortable enough in the therapeutic process to unload just horrific ongoing childhood abuse that had happened to him 30, 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, whatever class I'm supposed to have that helps me deal with this situation, I haven't had yet.
Oh, okay. Yes.
What am I supposed to do? What am I supposed to say? And I remember, I was doing everything in that moment I could think of besides talking. I was praying, I was thinking, I was like rereading mentally in my textbook. Does this say what I'm supposed to do here? And all I could think of was nothing. So that's exactly what I did. I said nothing. And I did the active listening things. I'm leaning forward in my chair, I'm nodding, and it was, I was counting the seconds because I didn't know what else to do. And I counted like 30 seconds of silence, counted 40 seconds of silence. And it was, to this day, one of the most powerful sessions I've ever been a part of.
Right. He needed that space. Maybe he needed that silence. He didn't need you to come up with a quick response.
Right. And, I think that's where empathy comes in to be a really important part of listening, because we do listen to understand. We also listen to obtain information. We listen for enjoyment. Hopefully people are listening to this podcast for enjoyment, or because they feel obligated because they're family. Tracy and Elliot, that's we listen to learn. A lot of times we don't listen just to listen, just for empathy.
And like really listening to someone is a gift to them. You're communicating that you recognize them and that they're important to you. Like you mentioned, it's not just in counseling, it's in potentially in every relationship we have. It's a gift to put your agenda aside and just listen and be present with what the other person's saying. It could be their story. It could be they're talking about what they found at the grocery store today, and they're real excited about that, which would be like how my husband has to listen to me now in a time of quarantine, when that's the excitement of my life. So it's a gift to the other person.
I think in relationships, especially marriage relationships, I hear a lot of one of the people really wants to just process things, and the other person might be a fixer. Like, why are you telling me if you don't want me to fix it? And that happens in my relationship, but I hear it a lot when I'm doing marriage counseling. There is this part of listening just to be present. And that's where empathy comes in. I think sometimes there's a fear of empathy, because we feel like if we're empathizing, then we might be threatening to lose perhaps our perspective or our rightness.
Right.
I want to be able to hear you, but I also want to hold my own position. And I think holding those two things in tangent can be tough.
Yeah, it really can. It reminds me, I wonder if we could link the video, not about the nail.
Yes.
Husband and wife talking to each other, and it's pretty funny because he's trying hard to listen. She's also not making it easy for him.
But you have a nail in your forehead.
You mentioned active listening, and there's an acronym that can help you think about active listening. It's a lot about what your body's communicating when you're talking with someone or listening to someone, because we communicate all kinds of stuff without saying anything at all. And so much of listening is what we're communicating with our body language. So you can think about this acronym called SOLAR, SOLER. So like solar, like the sun, but with an E. So the S in solar is sitting in a comfortable angle and distance. So you want to sort of sit in a way that's facing them, or stand in a way that's facing someone. Open posture, arms and legs uncrossed. And you can think about it, if you're talking to someone and their arms are crossed, does that feel very warm and inviting to you? whenever we're in counseling training, we have to, do video counseling sessions, and you're supposed to not cross your arms and legs. And that's kind of hard to do at first because it's just like I don't know, for natural thing to do that. L is leaning forward from time to time. So leaning toward the person. Just have a posture of leaning in and wanting to know what they're saying. And then the E in solar is effective eye contact. And I like this graphic that I brought up. It's like effective eye contact without staring. So yes, look at the person. Don't look at your watch. Don't look around. Look at the person, but please do blink as well. Like, please don't just stare intently into their soul, because that can be intimidating. Looking at the person who's talking to you communicates to them that they're important and that they're worth listening to. And the R just means to remain actively relaxed. So when you're doing the first SOLE, you can tend to be a little bit stiff, like, okay, open posture, not crossing your arms, leaning forward, eye contact. And then just relax. Be aware of what your stance and what your body language is communicating.
So how do you do that on Zoom? Everybody's remote now. So what does it look like to do solar virtually?
Gosh, that's hard. That's a good question. I think we can still tell a bit on Zoom whether someone's checked out.
I always look for eyes because I know if they're going left or right, then they're reading an email. Like, you're not listening.
Yeah, I mean, they could still be looking around at other things, even if they're, looking at the screen, not looking at the screen.
This is one of the things that contributes to Zoom fatigue, because in a one-on-one in-person relationship, we tend to not stare each other eye to eye for an hour. But on Zoom, because we're kind of not sure what to look at, we're either looking at ourselves, which is also super awkward. You would never stare at yourself for 6 hours a day, but on Zoom, your video is also there. We tend to not actually make eye contact that much. Some is really helpful depending on which culture you're from. We are now kind of pushing ourselves into an uncomfortable space. Like, sometimes I'll look at the camera, which on my computer is a little green light because I want it to feel like I'm looking at somebody, especially in counseling. Well, now I'm staring at a little green dot, which is really uncomfortable. to try to like convey active listening.
Yeah, and I'm looking at you right now, which probably doesn't look like I'm looking at you because, that is harder. You mentioned watching people's eyes. I've heard of people like, I know you can do this on Zoom. You can like zoom in on one particular person, and you can kind of tell like what they're doing. I was like, oh, okay.
I mean, this is something that I do. Nobody can see, but I tried to create a very comfortable environment for my Zoom. So like, I built a palette wall behind me and I have pictures that you can see, trying to create a space that contributes to listening, even though it's virtually.
You do a really good job of that. Like, whenever we have our Zoom meetings, like your whole setup there is very welcoming. I think mine is too, with the various jackets on the back door and the half open trunk in the background. So
it's just something to think about, because the solar is really about those external things to communicate that you're listening. So I'd encourage you just to pay attention to, what do you look like on Zoom? How are you coming across?
Right.
Don't excessively stare at yourself. It's always funny, when somebody's got the first Zoom of the day because they're fixing their hair.
Right.
Like, oh, this is your first go for the day because you just realized your hair's a mess.
Yep. When we were living in Central Asia, we worked with some other folks that weren't on our team, but they were team leaders. And something they said, it's very simple, but it stuck out to me, is that they said, when you have conflict, when you're trying to work with other teammates, whatever, your job is to assume the best of them and work to understand them. And I think that's so helpful when you think about listening to someone, is just really want the best, assume the best, and work toward understanding what's going on with them too, instead of coming in with your presuppositions and your own frustrations.
Yeah, I think that's the internal piece that really makes a difference in listening. I mean, I think that empathy is a gift. Some people are naturally gifted with empathy, but I also think that you can learn it. Brene Brown says 4 key elements to empathy is perspective taking, or putting yourself in someone else's shoes, staying out of judgment, and listening. It's kind of hard to do. We love being in a position of judgment. Recognizing emotion in another person that you have felt before.
Oh, that's a good one. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, I think this one's challenging because we're sitting here saying, be in the moment, listen to this person, but to empathize, you got to connect with that emotion in yourself. This person feels sad. I know what that's like because I have felt sad. So
Mhm.
for people that may not do this automatically, you have to pause for a second and be like, I need to connect with this emotion. My spouse is really experiencing frustration. I know what frustration's like. Having that in the moment, but also re-engaging into what they're saying as quickly as possible helps you be able to be with what they're experiencing. And then the last one
Mhm.
is communicating that you recognize that emotion.
Mm.
Brene Brown says empathy is a choice and it's a vulnerable one. And also, she says, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
It's so good. And connecting is recognizing, like you said, what that person is feeling and where that person is. I'm going to say also that's two different quotes for today for this podcast. Another aspect of listening is reframing what the person has said and sharing it back to them. And that's a skill we learn in counseling that's not solely for counseling. And so how that works is you're listening to someone, and when they come to a natural pause or whatever, you can say things. What I'm hearing is, oh, what you're saying is, or you could just, you don't
It
have to
sounds
say those
like.
sounds like. You don't even have to use those words. You can just say, so, wow, you're really hurt right now. If they say, gosh, I'm so mad. Like, wow, it sounds really, really powerful thing. Like, this is pretty upsetting to you. And goodness, that works wonders to help someone feel free and heard and to help them continue processing too.
And it also tells you if you got it wrong.
Exactly. They'd be like, no, no, that's not. But hey, helps you move forward too.
Yeah, and
Okay, so
it helps you get to that place of understanding.
right. So like, so when you're listening, your goal then is to listen, not think about your response, but just to think about what is this person telling me? How can I understand what they're saying?
And
So
in a healthy relationship, that role will be reversed at some point.
right.
And then you get to share. That doesn't always happen. Everybody knows somebody who at the end of a conversation you say, wow, I didn't say anything. I had about 10 ahas and that was 50 minutes ago.
Right. Right.
So why that does happen, being able to actively listen and engage really creates that safe space, and hopefully it gets reversed. And sometimes we get that from other people. We are actually there only to connect through listening with this person because that's what they need the most.
Yeah. And it's a gift that way. You're not going into it thinking you're going to get understanding in return. That's a hope. Eventually that will start happening, but it's a gift just to say, I'm going to listen and try and understand you.
I think a lot of it is how we approach that encounter. I mean, it's kind of like what you said. It's about your attitude coming in,
Hmm.
especially if it's somebody that there's some conflict with. How are you approaching any encounter? Are you approaching it with the perspective that this person's against you, they don't like you, because that really shapes the way you listen. There's
Mm.
this concept called meta dehumanization, which is a
What?
feeling like people on the other side of an opinion hate you.
Right.
But if you start with that assumption, then there's nowhere to go.
Right. You're already defensive and you're protecting yourself too, right?
Exactly. And I
Mm.
think that's very true in especially American political culture right now. We see this polarization. And I think there is that assumption that people on the other side, I wouldn't talk to them because they're just going to disagree with me and hate me.
Hmm.
Even to enter team conflict. Let's say you're on a field location and you're trying to figure out how to navigate some of the difficult paperwork, government relationship, and people are on different sides. If you enter it thinking this guy just thinks he knows everything and he doesn't care what I have to say, that's really going to shape how you interact with that.
Mm.
We make assumptions about how people are acting and thinking all the time. It's what we are in a perpetual state of doing. Somebody cuts us off on the road. Our first thing may be, oh, this guy, terrible driver.
Hmm.
Maybe
Hmm.
we think he's had a bad day. Maybe we think that he's out to get us because we might have braked. And really, that guy never looked in his rearview mirror.
It has nothing to do with you. Right.
So we do kind of come up to these assumptions about people we interact with.
It's helpful to take some time if there's something that's recurring or building with maybe a particular teammate or someone on the field, to think about what you're bringing to this, what assumptions you're bringing to this, and what that says about you and what that says about your preconceived notions. So you have conflict with a teammate. Well, what are you bringing to this? Is this a protectiveness of your call? Is it a feeling of inferiority? These are just examples, just a strong need to be right. And take some time to think about what you're bringing to the table as far as your own assumptions as well, because we do have them, right? We, like you were saying, like about the person driving, like what's wrong with them. So that self-examination is potentially painful, but also helpful if you're wanting to move forward.
And also to frame, what is this interpersonal encounter about? Are we trying to solve a problem? Do I need an answer from a supervisor? Is it for connection? Does it need to be for connection? Because actually the stuff is less important right now.
Right.
I've heard it say that, in couples, there's one who the truth and the facts are really important. And then sometimes there's one who that is less important. In our relationship, I'm the truth and facts person.
Okay.
And I mean, it's not good, but it has happened in the past where I will correct Ellie on something that's truly not that important. No, it wasn't Thursday, it was Friday.
And she loves that, I imagine.
Oh yeah, it goes down super well. I'm self-aware enough to know that this is not something that is actually that important. It feels important to me, but actually connection is what's more important. And I have to let that go and be in that moment and listen, as Ellie is oftentimes telling a story to somebody else.
Yeah, it's good to recognize that. I think that, with Tracy and I, he would be the one who's interested in the truth and the facts too. And sometimes I just want to be heard. I just want to be heard. So
we've talked a lot about listening. So we've talked about the physical behaviors of somebody who's listening. We've talked about the internal intrinsic motivation for a listener. What about the person who's sharing?
What is their job in the interaction, or just
how do you know you've been heard?
Oh, wow. I think you've been heard when the other person can, gosh, I'm stuck here, James. Sorry. I don't know what to say.
Well, think about yourself. How do you know if somebody has really heard you?
It's like using the body language, and it's using just maybe just oh, okay, or like just the empathetic responses. When someone doesn't come up with a quick response, but they might just say something like, thanks for saying that, or this must be hard, or that sounds like this is challenging. Like when someone, again, affirms maybe the emotion behind what's being said. What about you?
Sometimes it's just having that space to have said it.
Yes.
I love connecting with stories. So somebody shares a story, I want to share my story that's similar. And I do like it when people do that, but there's definitely times where I just want to actually get through all of my story. And for me, I really feel heard when I do that, and I get to the end and I'm like, wow, that was it and that was done. And there's not something else. Somebody just appreciated that.
Right. They appreciate that part of you and knowing that part of you.
I had a conversation with a coach just a couple weeks ago in which he was telling me some of his life story. And I'm playing on an American football team, and it was the whole team's on the bus, and I'm sitting next to the coach, and he's telling me his story. And I just listened, and then we kind of got back, and everybody unloaded and went off. And I think vulnerability is an important part of this, because both the person sharing but also the listener have to be vulnerable, because it's a vulnerable place to just listen and not sometimes share something that's really important to you.
Right.
And I wanted to appreciate the vulnerability because I'm a counselor and I know that's really important. But I'm also in this kind of ultra masculine environment where it's coaching and football and hitting people. So finally, I just sent him a text and said, hey, I really appreciate you sharing your story. And I think that's part of it. There's like, hey, this was just a moment for connection.
Right. Did he respond to that?
He did. Yeah, he was very grateful. And I think that's a part of it, being able to enter into that vulnerable place as both a listener, listening because you want to be there, because it's connection, because it's okay that somebody has a different perspective.
You bring up a good point about the benefits to the listener. Like there's benefits to the person who's being listened to, and the benefits to the listener too is being able to move towards someone in relationship, you can learn that vulnerability isn't actually so scary. It's really a great thing. This idea of shared humanity and sharing stories where maybe people whose perspectives or stories are different than you become less intimidating and less scary the more you are able to listen and lean into other people and lean into conflict or arguments or such. And so you actually grow as a person too, which helps you to be better able to listen to others. I like how you said, like, it's something that you like. The empathy and listening is something that you have to practice. For some people it comes more naturally than others, but as you continue to practice it, you continue to grow in it, and it overflows into other relationships.
Yeah, I'd say if you're listening to this and you're thinking, this might be this is an area we all need to grow in. Like Brandi and I do it professionally, and we're always needing to grow in our ability to listen well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
So I would look for an opportunity with somebody around you and say, I want to engage, and I just want to pay attention to what's going on internally as I'm listening.
Yeah. Are you wanting to answer quickly? Are you wanting to defend yourself? Are you wanting to come up with a quick response? What's behind those things as well? About having diverse friendships and seeking out diverse friendships too can help with being able to listen and engage. Getting back to what we started talking about at the beginning of this podcast, the environment now tends to be quite polarized, where we tend to just find people who are very similar to us, and we are either afraid to, we don't want to listen to people who are different than us. And so taking the time to purposely engage with people that are different than us can be really helpful.
I think it's important to listen to what other people are saying and not to be in judgment. Just say, I want to listen and I want to hear. And you said, perception is so important, because somebody's perception is their truth. That's how they encountered and experienced an event, and lots of different things shape it. And I think it's important for us to be able to hear where they're coming from and why they got to the place they are.
Right. So where they're coming from is important to them. Hopefully this was helpful, gives you some things to think about as we engage with other people around us, engage with teammates, and engage cross-culturally, ways you can move toward listening and move toward empathy and relationships.
David Augsburger says, being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they're almost indistinguishable.
Oh, that's so good.
And thanks for listening to us. See you next time.